All right. Welcome to the Vaughn Cast Show. I'm your host, Vaughn. Happy Friday, everybody. Today, I got a guest with me, the host of No More Dead Friends podcast, James. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty good. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to doing this and
Me too.
excited to share a little bit of my story with you.
Awesome. Well, so I found out about your podcast on Threads. I think it was a Sobriety Threads. Saw you posting. I saw your the podcast name. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I dig the logo. I'm a fan of traditional tattoos and at the Grim Reaper. I'm like, it's pretty sick, man. I'm gonna check this guy's stuff out. So today we'll be talking about your story. You've been clean for a few years now. I think 7, right?
7. Yeah, I'll have 8 years in August.
Wow. Early congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank
We're
you.
here to talk about your podcast and your story. So myself, I'm a recovery addict. I got 18 months. So
That's
I
awesome.
kind of know what it's like. So let's talk about like your upbringing and like, the circumstances that got you to start using.
Okay, yeah, I think it's super important for, for people to understand, for parents to understand, family members, and then, people who themselves, right? A lot of people out there are still using or drinking and doing the things that we do before we get clean and sober. And I think a lot of people use a lot of their external circumstances as excuses, right? And it's not always that quite that simple, right? A lot of times there really is trauma attached to things. There's a lot of things that fuel why we drink and use. But I think it's super, super important to always mention and point out, because so many of the family members might always ask themselves, like, where did we go wrong? And not to say that there's not bad parents and bad circumstances and stuff that really does contribute. But for the most part, at least in my situation, there really was nothing different my parents could have done, my family could have done. I had a solid upbringing. There was things that I dealt with growing up. Like I have Tourette syndrome. That was difficult growing up with. I don't have a relationship with my real father. My real father was in and out of prison my whole life. He's just like me. He's a drug addict. And so there were things that added to, stresses growing up, things that made me feel, discontent and uncomfortable, and things I struggled with. But overall, like, I played sports my whole life. I never went without. There were things I wanted that I didn't necessarily always get, but that's good for anybody. But like, there was always a place to sleep. There was always food on the table. I was always striving to participate in things and do things. And I was really blessed growing up. Right. So I don't necessarily, place blame or say like these are the reasons why I drank or use or anything. But what happened with me is once I did start kind of experimenting, that uncomfortability that I had and that discontent feeling and just the feeling of crawling out of my own skin sometimes just like went away. And I felt like I found the golden ticket, right? I felt like, the mystery of always wanting something and now having what I'm seeking, it was gone, and that's it. And I want nothing more than this feeling right here. So for me, that was it, right? That was the reason why I drank and used, is because when I got to that place of that relief, I could sigh that sigh of relief, and I didn't need anything else in life. I had it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I can relate, I mean, I didn't have the best childhood, but overall I had a place to sleep and went to school and everything. And I didn't realize that anxiety and just, you know, stress from my childhood. And similar
Mm-hmm.
is when I found drinking, you know, in my early teens, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. When I got older, I was like, oh, this is what adults do, and I realized, yeah, I feel a lot better. So I'm gonna keep doing that. and it escalated to other things. When did you start using, or when did you start dabbling with anything?
So I do have memories of like when I was really young. I think I was maybe like 8, 9, or 10, like stealing my mom's Mike's Hard Lemonade and stuff like that with one of my cousins. But it was just like that, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't consider like me doing that type of stuff really like my first time drinking or using. Like, yeah, like, technically those were like my first times drinking anything, but like I never got that like effect feeling really, the first time I really distinctly remember like that feeling of getting there and that feeling that I'm talking about, like where just all my problems are solved with this. I was 11 years old. There was an older friend of mine. So I was in the 6th grade. He was in the 8th grade. I don't even remember his real name. We called him Arkansas. He was from Arkansas and he was living out here in the neighborhood. And I'm in California at the time. I was in Murrieta, California. And so, he had some weed. I wanted to smoke weed. So he came over to my house and, he's like, most people don't really get high the first time they smoke weed. So we're going to smoke kind of a lot. And, I got super, super stoned and I went inside and raided the snack bar and sat down and watched Corky Romano for the first time and laughed my ass off. And, I was in heaven, dude. I was a little 11-year-old fat kid, super stoned, watching a funny movie and eating snacks. And, kind of the rest was history from that point, from that age to like, maybe 13, I smoked maybe 6, 7 more times. It wasn't really consistent, but once I was in like the 8th grade, once I was like 13, that's kind of when I became like an everyday stoner. And then for me, like the first time I like really, really drank, because I just liked weed. And like when I would steal my mom's Mike's Hard Lemonade, it was kind of like whatever. There was never really anything enticing me about drinking alcohol. I mainly just like to smoke. But I still remember me and one of my friends, that we were staying the night at my house and, my dad had some of his whiskey in the one cabinet and we were drinking a little bit. And I just remember just chugging it. Right. And I got way too drunk, throwing up everywhere, woke my parents up, and I just remember blacking out and then just waking up in the guest bedroom and being like, how did I get here? What happened? And then I really didn't drink from that point for till like later in high school. All high school, I was a multiple sport athlete. I was a varsity wrestler, varsity football player. But I smoked weed the whole time, but I didn't really do much of the drinking and partying, I'd say, until about like my junior going into my senior year is once I, started drinking some beers and stuff like that. So I did start pretty young. 11 years old is pretty young. And without getting into, too much of, transitioning into when I got sober, the last time I was in treatment, I had the realization, right, that like, okay, I was diagnosed with Tourette's when I was like, 5 or 6 years old. And from that point to when I started smoking weed, it was a lot of like trying this medication, trying that medication, seeing if this works. A lot of, I've been being altered how I felt since really like that age. And then at 11 is when I started smoking weed. And like, I was sitting in treatment for the last time at 24 years old. And I was like, ever since I can remember, I've felt altered. Right. And if I don't give myself, I remember, it's funny now, I remember sitting in treatment and saying like, if I don't give myself at least like 10 years of sobriety, I'll never know what it's like to be a normal person and to live a normal life. Like I'll have never given myself that chance. And if after those 10 years, like I don't feel content with where I'm at, or I don't feel like it's given me what I want out of this, then I can always go right back to it. And so I really like ever since I can remember, I feel like I've been altering how I feel.
Right. Yeah. Going back to high school, I never really like was partying much up until like my college years. I drank a couple times and smoked weed the first time in high school. It was like it was cool. It was whatever. Like it was like that thing, you start smoking cigarettes, smoking weed. It
Yep.
was cool. I popped my first E with like my prom date. It didn't do anything, you know, and that was cool. And then I think for me it was college. I think like that independent freedom, and yeah, from there like it just off and run up and running, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I think something about it. I think like around that time for me, it was like, oh, you're supposed to drink, you're supposed to party. It's just college atmosphere. But I was always the one that like took it too far. Yeah.
Yeah. And same here after a point. I got to that point where I was always taking it too far. But when I was around that age, I was a varsity sports player. I was supposed to, go to the next level. I got injured. And hindsight's 2020. I could have rehabbed myself for for my industry or my injury. I could have really pushed and strived to still continue down that path. But the easier path was just getting loaded, and so I really used that injury as like, as one of the excuses of, hey, look, this happened to me. And now I'm going to just kind of go down this path because this is what's in front of me. And for me, that time period was like after like the '08 financial crisis. And so that was one thing that like my family really suffered from, right? Like, my mom sold insurance. And like when that whole period was going down, like people stopped paying their insurance. They were switching to cheaper policies. They didn't want to, continue with her. So it's like we lost the house. Everybody lost their car. So as things started, on the family level started to kind of break down, I was like, well, it's super easy for me to sell drugs and sell weed and do this and make money. So I felt justified in doing that. And I really like, I excelled in school and in sports, but I couldn't even get a job at like Taco Bell or McDonald's and stuff like that. Like I tried getting a job there while I was in high school because I wanted to make some money for myself and get started on that path. And I just couldn't get hired anywhere. And it was like, well, this is super easy. And so I went down that path and I didn't go to college. And it really just kind of escalated from there.
Right. Going back to the thing you felt altered, I recently got tested a couple years ago for like I have ADHD, depression, and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. I had no idea I had all that stuff, but I feel like me using kind of masked that. I didn't know in my head that I had all these things. But I felt like when I was doing the uppers, I was very focused and calm. And I talked to my therapist about it. She goes, "Oh, after the results, that's probably why you like all those uppers, man, because you have ADHD and that kind of made you focus." And I think subconsciously I was self-medicating. I was anxious all the time. I drank, feeling down a lot, took a lot of E. I mean, obviously it didn't help. It made it worse. But to me, I was just like, it was normal.
Yeah. And same here, a lot of the uppers, once I kind of would cross that threshold of starting to become a little strung out, the first like day or so, it would really calm me down. And then once I kind of crossed that threshold into the strung out periods, then I'd be all over the place. But that's really what the uppers did for me too. They really just kind of like made me feel normal. So I'm undiagnosed in that aspect, but I know that when it affects you like that, that's typically what it means. Really, my Tourette's is the only thing that is diagnosed, but I know I have other stuff that's going on that I deal with, neurologically. But for me, like I choose not to take any medications, and I'm not a doctor. I can't tell anybody what to do. Listen to somebody that's a lot smarter than me when it comes to what you should do for medications. But for myself, I really do feel like I've always been altered, and from being in treatment and moving forward with my life, everything that I deal with is manageable for myself. In things that I do have to actually, like with this, right? I'm in here a few minutes early. I was sitting down getting things ready like 30 minutes early. For my work, working in treatment, I have to tour other treatment facilities and have people tour our treatment facility. And like, I'm showing up to things 25, 30 minutes early, because if I don't leave like 30 minutes early, I'm going to start doing what I'm doing. And then I'm going to look at the clock and I'm 15 minutes behind. Right. So a lot of things in my life today, I have to go out of my way to make sure that I'm accommodating other people instead of having other people accommodate me, and there's times when I'm not feeling it. Sometimes that depression hits and it can be like a tough morning or a tough day or a tough week or whatever. But I have like my checklist of things that I make sure I do, right? That gets me out of self, gets me out of my, gets me out of my little space, right? To make sure that like I'm doing what I need to do for work. I'm doing what I need to do for my recovery. I do a lot of you see all like the bobbleheads and the different things and stuff. Like I do a lot of like sports memorabilia, Pokemon cards, sports cards, a lot of stuff like that I sell on eBay, making sure that like I'm posting 5 new products on my eBay store every day. Like a lot of these little things to where it's like, even if I do nothing for a day, right? I've probably gone to a meeting. I've probably talked to my sponsor. I've posted things on my eBay store. I've made the calls I need to make for work. I've done these things to where, the day wasn't just a day of nothing. And so I really have to make sure that I have the checklists and the things I do, because left to my own devices, and especially being unmedicated, I'd be a mess. I need structure, which can be kind of tough too. Working a remote job, I do admissions in business development for a treatment center in San Diego. And so I'm kind of my own boss in a sense, as far as making my own schedule. And so if I didn't have the foundation of my recovery that I built early on, I wouldn't be successful in what I do.
Right. Like what you said, I started getting ready for this like an hour or two early, just doing little things, taking my time. I like being early to everything. It's like you said, I even bought a watch, like a really cheap watch. I just need it because I can't look at my phone all the time, because like I'm on my phone and then like I don't realize time flies. And, oh shit, it's been 30
Oh,
minutes.
yeah.
It happens a lot, like more than I'd like to admit. So I like to be punctual. That's one thing I can do. And the structure part, I never liked structure growing up. I hated it. But I realized I don't like other people's structures. I like my structures. Like I like leaving home at a certain time. I like doing very like certain things. Like I gotta be at work at a certain time. I gotta do this at a certain time. Very like small things like that. And it helps me out. I like that checklist thing too. I should do that. I think for me, my thing is like, well, do anything you want. Just don't get high today.
Yeah.
Obviously don't harm people and all that. I think that's just like, if all you can do is that's a good day.
That's a win. And especially in the beginning, it's one of those things that over time gets a lot easier. It's one of those things, like for me today, no matter what happens in my life, drinking and using is not an option. And that doesn't mean that I'm this like pinnacle of greatness and I'm not susceptible of what can happen. I could stop doing all the things that I do and eventually get myself to a point where it'll be an option. But my life is set up in such a way that it's just not an option for me today. So like whether it's a death in the family, financial struggles, I'm married today. So me and my wife have goals. And a lot of times like, with what's going on with interest rates and with the housing market, like that's buying a house has had to been put on the back burner for going on like 3 years now. So it's like continuing to stay patient and manage expectations. Like life is going to happen on life's terms. Life is going to be life. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult whether you're drinking and using and whether you're sober or not. But how we deal with those difficulties, how we manage expectations and all that stuff, and keep ourselves from picking up and making things worse. It's just not an option, right? Like I used to hear the no matter what type stuff, from people in the rooms early on. And like, I just didn't understand it. But I'd say probably around like year year 5 is when that really started to click. Just kind of getting into a little bit of, my experience like with treatment. The first time I went to rehab, I was like in this spot where, my life around me became a mess, and I always described kind of like those rock bottoms as like running into a wall, because that's more what I felt like was happening. I understand hitting bottom, but for me, like I was always like striving for something, but because of how I was managing my life, I just felt like I was hitting a wall. I was hitting this place where like I can't move past here in life. And so when it got really bad the first time, not the first time it got really bad, but the first time it got bad enough to where I went to treatment, I went into treatment, and I still remember my sister driving me to rehab. And she was like, are you going to stop smoking weed? Are you still going to drink? Are you just stopping other drugs? Like how, where's your head kind of at? And I was like, well, I'm not going to stop smoking weed. I'm not a crazy person. I remember distinctly saying that to my sister on the way to rehab. But I when I was there, I slowly started buying into it, but I wasn't still there yet, right? Like I wasn't done. The first time I went to rehab, I was not done. I had unfinished business. I still thought I could outsmart everything. I still thought that there was a way for me to drink manageably and smoke weed manageably, maybe do some occasional cocaine. I'm not going to be smoking crack or meth anymore. But there's definitely ways for me to kind of like take a weekend with some Jameson and some acid and have a good time, right? that's still what realistically how I thought I could live my life. But I slowly started like buying in to the program and to some of the principles that were being presented to me. Two guys, Jay, he was kind of the rock star at the treatment facility that I went to. On Monday through Friday, he ran like a Medi-Cal program or like a Medicare program in San Diego. And then Friday afternoons, he just showed up for a few hours, hung out with us, took us to a meeting in In-N-Out if the group wanted to go to a meeting in In-N-Out for the night. And he'd just like hang out with us. And he was way older, got sober in the 90s, went to, Deadhead shows way back in the day. And I loved taking LSD and stuff. And I was a festival guy. So we had some really cool conversations about God or our perceptions of God and how we kind of looked at that. And it was like my first glimpse at somebody who, found something in the program, but it really was their perception of a higher power, not anybody else's, description of it. Right. And then, my case manager, Corey, he was somebody who got clean in prison, and, he was doing what I was doing at a much bigger level and a lot better than me. And he got in a lot of trouble, and, he ended up getting clean in prison, and I got clean in a nice, comfy rehab in Temecula. So, he made it very clear that I was perfectly capable of stop doing what I was doing and to make something of my life. And I really bought in with those two guys, and so I stayed sober for about 6 or 7 months after that. And then I had a relapse, and then it was very, very back and forth. And then I finally hit that final rock bottom, that final time of like, I'm trying to smash a square peg into a round hole. I'm trying to manage this and make this work. I thought I could just smoke weed once, or the first time I thought I could just drink. So, which is super hilarious. As you can tell from some of those figures, I don't know if you're familiar with anything that's up there. I got like the Namazu and Nami, and then I got some Berserk stuff up there. My whole life, I've just been like way into Pokemon, anime, all that stuff. I read a lot of mangas too. And so when I first got sober, the hobby that I picked back up was playing Pokemon competitively. Right. So, doing a lot of tournaments. I went to the Nevada State Championships out in Vegas, didn't drink for the first 2 days. And then it was like the last night I was laying in bed and I was like, I think I could have a drink. And so I went and I drank, and it was like a week later I was doing all the other stuff I didn't want to do again. But basically immediately I was felt with that feeling. And so having to drive back from Vegas straight to a meeting and pick up a white key tag and being like, yeah, I just relapsed at a Pokemon tournament in Vegas was pretty hysterical. But when I showed back up that second time, I was so done and I was so ready for something new that I walked into the house with my hands up doing the Rocky thing. I was so glad to be there. And from that moment forward, like I've never had an honest desire to drink or use again. I've had moments where I've gotten paychecks and my brain is like, hey, you can go do this, or, like the thoughts still happen, but those thoughts triggering an emotional, physical response has not happened once since I got clean. Since August 22nd, 2016, I can honestly say I haven't had a desire to drink or use, but that doesn't mean it's been perfect. That doesn't mean I haven't had thoughts. I've just never had that craving. And so it got to a point where it was so bad that I was just so ready and willing to have anything else than what I had, that I was ready to do the work. I was ready to be open-minded. I was ready to say, these are my beliefs and these are my core values and these are my views on the world. And if they're wrong, I'm okay with changing them. If they still hold depth and weight and they still hold value to me down the road and I keep them, great. But if not, I'm willing to accept that, like, I need to change everything in order to change my life. And I think that put me at this place of willingness that, I don't see a lot of people get to. I'm super, super blessed and super lucky that I got to that place at 24 years old. But what it allowed me to do, especially being so young, is instead of being at this place where, like, you already have your life and you're trying to hold on to everything and you're trying to squeeze recovery where it fits in, like, everything in my life was recovery based. And then I built a life around that from there. And I built this foundation where, in the beginning, that checklist I had was go to a meeting, talk to my sponsor, read my book and do some step work, talk to other people in the program, and go, like, fellowship and be of service. Right. That was my checklist. If I was told if I did that every single day, I'll blink and I'll be down the road and I won't drink or use, and I bought into that. and it's changed and molded since then, but I carry those same principles, right? Like I do like 2 or 3 meetings a week. Typically I'm always at my Tuesday night men's meeting. Every other Sunday I do a Sunday meeting. Sometimes I do a Thursday meeting or a Wednesday meeting. I don't do the every single day thing anymore. My life has gotten big to a point where, yes, I have time. If I made the time, I honestly could hit a meeting every day. I just don't feel like I need to, right? So I stay involved enough to where I can't just isolate and back away. But I stay to a place where I have a life, right? We don't get clean and sober to just sit in meetings 24/7, right? I got clean and sober to live my life. And that's what I get to do today. But that's where, like, that checklist thing originated from was that's how I built my foundation on how I need to live. Right. My sponsor at the time gave me that checklist, and told me if I did these things, I'd stay sober. And so, I did that, and I've changed and added to it and taken away from there. But, like, all those same principles are still there in some element.
Right. That's cool. You got clean at an earlier age. I got clean 18 months ago. I'm 36. I felt like, to me, 20s was cool. When I got to when I was like 28, 29, I'm like, okay, I got to stop at 30. I got to stop. I felt like there was this pressure. Like, I can't be doing this, man. I can't be doing this anymore. I saw how like it affected my life, but I guess it's a gift and a curse. I was a functioning addict where I could go to school, I could go to work, I can still do it. And I thought, I deserve it, man. Like, this is what adults do. I didn't know that all adults don't do this, but I thought like if I can get my shit together, if I can pay my rent, if I can do all the normie things that people do, I can party. But then, to a point when I couldn't. And after that, and then like when I got clean for like 6 months just by myself, I'm done. I went to a dentist appointment. I didn't realize they would give me laughing gas for a wisdom tooth extraction, but they did. I'm like, oh shit. After that, I relapsed. And I thought to myself, oh, I guess it's going to be like a for life thing. It's how it's going to be. I was able to stop when I realized like I got scared because I started not caring anymore about what happened after. But yeah, man. Also to the Berserk, that stuff is heavy. I started watching that at a young age. I had no clue that would happen. I'm like, I thought it was some normal ass anime. Okay, it's like medieval fights, cool, And then wait, what's going on? Wait, what happened? And the
Yeah.
eclipse happened. I'm like, oh shit, this was not,
Yeah.
random. But yeah,
I thought it was, I think it was on Threads or something. You posted something about the eclipse when the eclipse was happening here in America. And I was
yeah,
like, yes.
yeah. Are you familiar with Goblin Slayer?
I've seen a few episodes. It wasn't anything that I just, it's funny with manga. I like really focus to like read through entire series. When it comes to watching anime, I have anime ADHD. Like every day I want something different. So there's a lot of series that like I've finished, but there's a lot of series that I kind of get all over the place. I think I watched like the first like 4 or 5 episodes of Goblin Slayer. I really liked it. I just,
Yeah,
I'm like 400 episodes into One Piece. I'm like, I think I'm like 2 something into Bleach. I think I'm, 2 something into Fairy Tale, and Freerin has basically took over my life the last 6 months. That was one of the best series I've seen in a long time. So that was like a start to finish one for me. But yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. But I did like Goblin Slayer. I just didn't get a chance to finish it.
It threw me off. Not in a good,
Yeah,
not in a good way. I'm like, what the fuck is this? It's
yeah.
like it can do without those parts, but yeah, man. Back to the recovery thing. Like, yeah, I go to meetings once a week now. 4 is 2 men's meeting. I really like the men's meetings. There's more like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you're not trying to impress girls or whatever. It's just people talking. You know?
Men's meetings saved my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go to one every Friday. Um, but yeah, man. Um, so like I never thought that I would do NA. I think I tried everything else. I've done NA in the past, but I felt like I had to go because my friends gave me intervention, but they were like some of them were drunk or fucked up already, you know? Um, but yeah, I don't know. Something about it I didn't like. So I tried like other things, and personally didn't work for me, can work for other people. I tried the self-help route, like watching YouTube videos, reading books. That's when I didn't realize addiction was a disease, or they don't want to admit that I had that disease. I thought I could just like function. But yeah, man, NA, it really helped. That was like my last resort, you know?
It's the last house on the block, baby.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of people who I don't think are properly educated on the disease. Maybe not educated is the right word, but I don't think they've necessarily had the right experiences relating addiction. A lot of people don't like to call it a disease. They feel like it's a cop out. But for us, the thing that's important to understand is you can treat a disease, right? When you know what the issue is, now you have a roadmap. Now you have a solution. Now you have things that you can do about it. And at the end of the day, the people who put together the DSM-5 are a little bit smarter than somebody who feels really strongly that their kid is struggling with drugs and alcohol when they had the ability to just stop and their kid doesn't, right? Or their brother or their sister or whatever, right? So, or somebody that they don't even know. So I think a lot of people kind of have this like misconception, or there's like that stigma to addiction. For me, I don't ever hide from telling people I'm a drug addict. If I was still smoking crack, you would know within 2 seconds that I'm a drug addict, and you probably don't want to talk to me. So I've been clean and sober for a long time. So I never stray from telling people somewhat of my story or what I do and what I'm involved in, what I do professionally, what I do like with the podcast for fun and stuff. It's freeing to me. I learned at a young age, being a fat kid with Tourette's, that if you wear that as a badge of honor, and come up with clapbacks and have a good time and just, you know what I mean, accept who you are and build that self-worth for yourself, people are going to accept you, the minute somebody starts making fun of you about something and you clap back at them in a fun way, at least the way I grew up, you typically just make friends. A lot of my guy friends, that's how we end up being friends, is through just talking crap to each other. And then there you go. But so, and also too, right, as a drug addict, I've always had what I like to call delusional confidence. But I did also struggle with some self-worth stuff, right? So it's like, I always had that like better than and less than complex. And I always, or a lot of the times, I would compare how I felt on the inside to how people presented and looked on the outside, right? And so for me, I always really liked and loved who I was as a person. So my self-worth didn't come from I'm inadequate in any way based on like who I am. It was always that feeling of, I see this person have all these things in their life and I don't. So because I don't, I feel this way. And then I compare how I feel to how they look, versus like I'm uncomfortable with who I am or in my body or anything else like that. Right. So, I just wanted to kind of like make that distinction, because I think it's important. It's important for me to talk about like why we think the way we think, the thoughts that I had, my views on things, and a lot of those like the delusions and the distortments of how I viewed things. Because for me, that was like the most like groundbreaking thing, getting sober. Cognitive behavioral therapy was a super important treatment modality for me, because it's all about going over distorted thinking, distorted perceptions, different types of right and wrong thinking. And for me, it was the first thing where I was really able to like look at how I thought, looked at how my thoughts worked. And now what can I do to change those thoughts, to change my behaviors, to change my outlook? That was my favorite, because then I just realized I was freaking crazy, which is good, which is why I like, drug addicts and alcoholics are my people, because they're just absolutely nuts. And then we get clean and sober and we get to do really, really cool things with our lives. But so for me, it's always very important for me to kind of talk about like how I felt at different times, because that's always the common denominator for any of us, right? I was listening to the new Rogan podcast yesterday, driving back from LA, because I had a long drive coming back from the Dodger game, and he was talking about, no matter who you are, the hardest thing that you've dealt with in your life is the hardest thing you've ever dealt with. So whether that's a parking ticket, or that's a parent that's an alcoholic, or whether you're an alcoholic, or whether, you're somebody who just doesn't have much hardship, right? The hardest thing you've ever dealt with is the hardest thing you've ever dealt with, and struggle is struggle. And people who hit rock bottom in a Mercedes Benz, people hit rock bottom and they're living on the streets, that common denominator and that tie that binds us is the emotional and the spiritual bankruptcy that drugs and alcohol take us to. And how we feel and the emotions and the thoughts, like all that type of stuff, whether you're somebody who just smokes too much weed and can't move forward in your life, or you're somebody who's smoking crack and, everything's burning down. Chances are there's plenty of thoughts and feelings and emotions that are very similar. The first time I showed up to rehab, did not know what to expect. There were two middle-aged women, probably in their like mid 40s to mid 50s, somewhere in that range. And they were just taking too much of like their pill prescriptions. And then there was this like 60 something year old gay guy that was like pretty flamboyant, but like he was hilarious, and here I am 23 years old. I've been dealing drugs and doing drugs. And I'm just like, where am I? Like this isn't what I expected rehab to be. And, over the course of a stay, people come, people go, the milieu changes. But like that first like week or so, it was like I had to find a way to find common ground with these people that on a very surface level, there's just nothing there. Right. But when you sit in group with people and you talk about what's going on with your life and what your struggles are, and everybody's doing the same worksheet about this behavior or this core issue or this or whatever it happens to be that day, those barriers come down a little bit. A lot of smoking cigarettes and hanging out, smoking cigarettes in rehab. That's where the real work happens. That's when, you begin to really become friends with somebody that you would never if we saw each other in the real world, we would have never had a conversation with each other. And then here you are making friends with people, in treatment because you're living with them, you're in close quarters, and it's just kind of what happens if you're open to the experience.
I miss Newports.
Yep.
I smoked here and there, but I always liked those a lot. Brought back good memories, and I was bummed that they don't have them anymore. But so going back to this, like you've been clean for 7 years. I think my question is, and a lot of people who have less time, does it get easier for you, or in your experience, does it get easier?
It definitely gets easier. So I think that for myself and for a very, very long time, we need to go at this with all gas, no brakes, right? We need to really continually build the habits that's going to set us up for success. Right. And like I touched on earlier, in the beginning for me, that was going to a meeting, doing step work, reading my book, talking to my sponsor, fellowshipping with people who are in recovery. I mean, it's something like this, right? Like we're lucky doing the podcast. When we sit and do this, that's fellowship. And if this is the most you do for your recovery today, dude, you've gotten what you need to out of the day, so doing the things that make sure that this kind of stays at the forefront and we continue to work to build a better lives for ourselves and not reach like a place of being stagnant. I think that is super, super important to stay active and doing all those things in the beginning until you get to that place where not that you can suddenly pump the brakes or anything, but you get to the place where you've built a life that's worth living. You've built something for yourself that if I pick up and get loaded, I give this all away. And it might not happen overnight, right? And so you always have to stay vigilant for the thinking that like, hey, I can just, maybe do a little something or whatever. But when for me, I've built a life that's not contingent upon recovery, but I know based on my personal experience that I'm not going to be able to manage it because I end up in a place of unmanageability. And like, this means more to me than that, right? I can do whatever I want with my life, or I can drink and get loaded, right? I choose to do whatever I want to do with my life. And that choice, that power of choice that we get back, it becomes so much easier to live in that place where you don't want to turn and look the other way, and you don't want to turn and go down that other path. But the reality is it's always there. it doesn't mean that life itself suddenly becomes way easier. Life's going to happen on life's terms. We recently, my wife just lost her father a few months back. That was a tough period to go through. But not once for either one of us did getting loaded end up being like a thought or an option, right? Every day was about how can I show up in my wife's life today? How can I make her day a little bit easier? How can we walk through this together and as a unit? And that's amazing, right? Like that's not anything that me getting loaded is going to be focused on. I'm not going to be focused on the right things. There was definitely a couple of days where it's like getting back from the hospital or getting back from her mom's house or whatever, and it's like, oh, I know we got to go do this at 8 a.m. and it's coming on 1 o'clock at night. I wish I could like press pause and give myself an extra 12 hours. But it was never like, hey, let me check out and let me get loaded. But it was very much, there was just like, there were moments where it was a lot, but being sober, it allowed us to walk through it together. So to answer your question, yes, it does get a lot easier. But no one waves the magic wand, right? We have to make it easier for ourselves. If you think that you're going to white knuckle it and stay clean, not doing any of the footwork and just thinking time's going to cure it, it's probably not. But if you do the work and you do the things you do, and it, to me, drinking and using is like thinking about high school, right? I can think about high school. I can get pumped up thinking about, football games or wrestling matches or, things that like I did in I can think about it. Right. And I can kind of get to that place, but I'm not going to go back to high school. I don't want to go back to high school. It might be cool to put football pads on one more time, but like, I'm not going to go hit Dick's Sporting Goods and buy football pads and go run around and hit people, right? That's just not going to happen. So it's like I can think back to drinking and using, and I can visit those places, and I can think about those experiences and the times when it was really good before it was, good with problems or just problems, right? I can think back to that place and get to that space mentally, but it doesn't trigger an emotional response today. It doesn't make me feel like I need to go drink or use. And that's the place we want to get to, right? Is where like looking back and thinking back, it's just like a distant memory. And we can observe the past for what it is and not get stuck in it. We can move forward. I think the best thing that I was told when I was in treatment was from this psychiatrist that I only saw one time. And he was a really cool Indian dude. And we were chatting and we started talking about God and some different things. And he was like, he's like, I see kind of where you're at. And he's like, let me tell you, if you have 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future, you're going to piss on your present. And I was like, wow, that is me in a nutshell. And that's what I've been doing. And so I just try and like live in the moment and that always looking for that next indicated step. When somebody asks me to do something like this, being ready to show up and do things like this. And it keeps getting easier and easier. It keeps getting better and better, but that's not going to happen for you unless you do the work, no matter who you are.
Right. Thank you for that. I still think about it, like the idea of it. I mean, for me, it's like, I kind of laugh at it, like what I was doing back then. My friends and I send drug memes. It doesn't trigger me anymore, but it's kind of like, oh shit, I remember this is relatable. But then it's like automatically, I'm like, yeah, this seems funny, but like, I know what happens if I do this. I have stressful days too, where it's like, man, I'm really upset right now. And I think about like doing drugs, and I'm like, that'll make me more upset, Yeah. So I won't even do it, or I'll just like zone out. But yeah, so far 18 months in, I don't really think about it in that sense. I like to use humor to like cope with it and just think about it and stuff. Tell my friends all these stories, all those good times. It was fun, but I just know like that was the past. I guess for me, it's just I'm wary because I don't know. I've heard in the rooms that people go out like 10 years in sometimes,
for sure,
and sometimes they don't come back. Also, that's the thing too. It's like, with the fentanyl out there, knowing me, I would do the same doses I always would, when that could be really fatal. So that's what
Yep.
really keeps me kind of grounded. Well, let's talk about the podcast, man. Talk to us about your podcast and how'd you get the name No More Dead Friends?
Yeah. So funny enough, the name, and if you scroll down on like my personal Instagram, I found this like picture that was like a syringe with wings and it said No More Dead Friends on it. It was just like some street art or something. I found that picture way early on. I think I might have had like a couple years or something like that when I found it years ago. Just thought it was cool, posted it on my Instagram, went on with my life. I'd say about a year and a half ago is when I kind of had the realization while working in the treatment industry of like, man, I have really, really cool conversations with a lot of people on a daily basis, right? Like my job is networking, going out, meeting people from a bunch of different treatment centers. It's not like I'm just working at my treatment center, just talking to like who I talk with at my rehab every day. Like I'm meeting CEOs, I'm meeting clinical directors, I'm meeting case managers, reps of other facilities. I'm meeting really, really cool people in recovery who are on the front lines trying to save people's lives. And I kind of just had the realization that like, man, these conversations that I'm having on a daily basis are really, really cool. And I want to do something to where I can bring that to people. So I had the initial idea for the podcast about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. I had a different name that I was going to roll with. I bought some of the equipment to do it in person. I wanted it to be in person. I wanted it to be, with the visual component. I had this like idea of perfection of what I wanted to do. And I started at the time, like looking through and trying to find other recovery podcasts. And really the only one that was doing what I liked or what I kind of had envisioned prior to even finding them is Hell Has an Exit. Super awesome podcast. Literally hours and hours and hours of content you can go listen to if you want to check them out. Definitely check out Hell Has an Exit. But that was like that was the only person looking around at these recovery podcasts. I was like, this person's doing what I envision. A little different than how I have it set up now, but so, and then I had this idea of perfection and what I wanted to accomplish and they're killing it. So everything they like how he does everything there was already what I was envisioning as far as this vision of perfection. So I kind of had that to like compare it to. And it just kind of I bought like a lot of the equipment and then I didn't have a place to do it. I didn't have a way to do like the visual stuff. Been waiting for, and then I was just waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally one day I had the realization of like, man, I just got to do this. I just got to start. So I was like, I'm just going to start on Zoom. I'm going to, I paid for the Zoom subscription so I could record and do all that stuff. Got my first guest set up and then I started doing some of the designs. I remembered the No More Dead Friends thing. And I was like, I really like that. I think I'm going to, steal that and run with it. And then I hopped on Kittle to like screw around and make the designs and stuff. And I made like 6 or 7 kind of cool ones. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I liked like my top few options. So when I decide to make like the main thing, that's like the cover on all the podcasts. When I made that and decided to make it that one, I realized like, oh man, I like these other designs. Why don't I try and do like a clothing line with it? So everything with the clothing line is set up on print on demand right now. The goal is for me to get to this place where, I'm about to do a big order of shirts to where I can start doing events and go be a vendor at events and stuff. There's a lot of events in the recovery industry down here in Southern California, to where I can get to and I can vend, sell some shirts, further network, get to know people, promote the podcast. And then, if at the end of the day, man, the clothing line just pays for the hosting fees and the subscription fees and the $60 of overhead I have a month, really, if that's as good as it ever gets, I'm going to be happy and content and keep doing this because I love doing this. This is what, at the end of the day, this doesn't need to make me money. It's got to be it's about what keeps me sober and what helps, me reach other people and hopefully get other people sober. Because I have a ton of dead friends, and I want my friends to stop dying. My friends started dying at an early age. One of our first friends that died in the friends group died on Xanax and alcohol. I think we were all in like 8th grade. He was a year or two above us. I have a friend that overdosed in the Walmart bathroom stall, left behind 2 kids, died in a Walmart. I have a friend who passed out while walking, hit his head on a coffee table, died. His sister found him. My one of my best friends growing up, he died a few years back. One of my other really good best friends growing up, he died like 7 years ago. 7 years ago now. And then once I started getting in recovery and getting the rooms, dude, like, man, that number just kind of escalated from there. Cause now it's like, it's not just the people in my friends group who are messing around and doing things, it's clients in treatment that I've met. It's, everybody from the meetings. When I got sober after treatment and I got sober here in California, I moved out to Colorado. I had a buddy's couch I could sleep on, stayed there for about 2 weeks or so. And then I moved into this sober living halfway house, Pikes Peak Sober Living. It was a 16-man house. You started in a 6-man room, started on the top bunk. As people would leave, you'd move down to the bottom bunk, and then you'd move out of the 6-man room into a double room or whatever. The only person who had a single room was the manager, which I eventually did become manager. I stayed there for a year, so I managed it for a bit. But man, like my earliest days there, this dude, Jason, had the bunk below me. I was on the top bunk. I was selling security systems. He was selling these like reading, learning packages, trying to like teach kids how to read and stuff. So every morning I'd be like, I'm heading out trying to make these wives feel secure with their security system, locking down the fort. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go teach little Timmy to read today. That was like our thing, getting ready to go and sell things. And, he ended up leaving the sober living one night and started picking up again. And a couple months later, he died. My one buddy, Dominic, that I was friends with, he died. So it's like, dude, the list goes on and on and on. So many people who've touched my life have passed away from drugs and alcohol. And anything I can do to help save or reach one person, it's what's important, man. That's the stuff that really matters in life, is making sure that we get to that place where, we can give back. It's time for me to give back, which is why I choose to do this.
Thank you for sharing, man. I mean, my condolences. That's a lot of people. We lost friends, family. For me, I've personally never lost anybody like directly, but I noticed that once I started getting clean, I started getting messages from people that I know were like, oh, my boyfriend passed away from overdose or whatever. And I'm like, damn, that's really wild. And yeah, I don't know. That's tough, man. Must be difficult to like get past it or just grieve, yeah, it's really scary. I feel like now, especially, I don't know. It sounds weird, but I feel like drugs were safer maybe like 10 years ago.
They for sure were. I was lucky. I got clean right before really the fentanyl thing really took off and blew up. That was never anything we had to worry about back when I was getting, still getting loaded and stuff. Like, we still had the people, we would still carry around like the little test kits sometimes to where you got something, you didn't know what it was, throw in the test kit, shake it around. It's this color, it's that. There's still stuff like that. Cause that was really like, so 2016 is when I got sober. 2015 was the first time I went to treatment. That was really like right when the fentanyl stuff was really starting to become prevalent. So it was around for a little bit before then, but it didn't really become a problem until like that time, shortly after that time. And it's terrifying, man. Like it's just like so many of the things that I was doing, it'd be so easy for that to be in it. And, I always will repeat myself saying this. I've said it so many times, is like, because I was a drug dealer and I was a lazy drug dealer, and I don't, I assume that there was plenty of drug dealers who are equally as lazy. I think for the most part, and I could be wrong, but I think for the most part, with the fentanyl getting in things that it's not supposed to be in, yeah, I don't know if it makes sense financially to cut shit with fentanyl, but I know from like a user standpoint, it doesn't make sense to have fentanyl and cocaine or fentanyl on weed or anything like that. So, I mean, I think personally that a lot of it is people weighing stuff out on their scale, and the amount of fentanyl it takes to take somebody out if you don't use any whatsoever is probably a small enough amount where just the residue is getting on stuff from people not cleaning their scale or not using like different tubs when they're zeroing it out. And I think that probably has a bigger impact than we might think on it getting into things that are taking people out. And like I said, I could be wrong, I'm not going to sit here and try and convince anybody I'm the smartest man in the room. But I know that, plenty of people were buying weed from me. There might have been some cocaine residue on that, and plenty of people who were buying cocaine from me would have some green flakes in there. So I think that it's perfectly logical that's probably how at least some of these fentanyl accidents are happening, because that's what it is for a lot of the people in the younger generation. Even somebody as big as Mac Miller, is buying cocaine and it ends up having fentanyl in it, and so I think a lot of these younger folks are experimenting with drugs that, like, realistically aren't going to probably, unless you have pre-existing health conditions, like, plenty of the stuff that like I experimented when I was younger, like, it's fine to kind of like experiment with some things, right? Like, not everybody ends up being a drug addict. I don't encourage people to take the risk. But the reality is, for a lot of normal people out there, they're able to just kind of like experiment with things, have their fun. And then when it's time to stop, they stop and they move on with life. That literally is a lot of people's experience. I don't encourage people to like test the waters and figure that out for yourself. But if you have to, we want people to be safe and have safe options. And back in the day, a lot of things used to be safe and they're just not anymore.
Yeah. 100%, man. I don't like telling people like get sober, but like I thought I was one of those normal people. I like what you said, that not everybody's an addict. Most of my friends, they weren't addicts. Like they were partying with me, but they stopped on like Friday or Saturday night. I kept going till like Sunday night, Monday morning. There'd be a time where like my circle of friends that would use, it got smaller because they kind of like said, okay, I got work tomorrow, or I got school, I got a job tomorrow. I'm not going to do it.
I got responsibilities, dude.
Yeah,
what are you doing?
I tweaked out like a Monday morning, like, oh, fuck, like paranoid as fuck, with a tin full in my hand and shit. Like, what was that? Yeah, man. I mean, back then, the worst thing they can cut coke with was like baby laxative. So what? You go in the bathroom, shit longer? No big deal. Or like acetone. Okay, cool. Or like, oh, what the fuck is it? Is it like, or they cut the tar with like fucking brown sugar. It smells funny. Oh shit, the fuck got ripped off, and now it's scary. I think I never shot anything, which I think helped, but still, man, like I remember one time I was smoking shit and I was like some meth, and like, I don't know, something fell off. I'm like mellow, but I don't feel much. And I kept buying more, and I tested it and I told the plug, like, hey, this has fentanyl. Oh shit, really? Like they didn't know. Like they were purposely they didn't know. I had to send them a text. I even gave them some strip tests. Oh shit, yeah, I'm gonna talk to so and so. But yeah, man, it's really sad. It's unfortunate, like people going out just trying to experiment. Yeah, man, yeah, like you said, around 2016, 2015, for me, my friends, they take Xanax like religiously, whatever, to them it was whatever. But then like one of our friends like took one or two, which is normal for him, and he got in a car accident, nothing crazy. But the toxicology report came back and there was something else that was not that was not a benzodiazepine. And I think around that time, the pills, you couldn't like, you started before you could tell if it was pressed, but now they're so well made, you can't tell anymore.
Yeah. And that's terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, I think that's all the time we have, man. Thank you again for sharing your story. where can we find you on Instagram and your podcast?
Yeah, so Instagram threads, No More Dead Friends 24. It was established in 24, so I'm gonna keep that 24 on the handle. And then the podcast is anywhere you can find podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere. So it's on all the directories. Right now, my schedule is to just post as much content as my hosting allows me to. Right, I can always pay to post more, but right now I am currently just trying to build consistency. The schedule I'm going to get to is one a week. I do both full length testimonial episodes as well as topic discussion episodes. So the full length testimonial episodes are typically about an hour, and then the topic discussion ones are going to be more like 20 to 35-minute episodes on specific topics relating to recovery. And so, I'm still building, I'm still working, but what I'm doing right now is staying consistent and building that. So, as soon as I get to the point where I'm going to be onto a fixed schedule, I will be announcing that on Instagram and Threads. But you can find me there. My personal Instagram is Hi James with 3 I's. So you can find me there as well too. Reach out to me there, or the No More Dead Friends 24.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Have a good one. I'm going to stop this real quick.